I would say for the corporate network, we've probably seen a lot less change over the past few months than we typically would. But one of the challenges for the typical IT admin is going to be that now they're no longer supporting one corporate network with users connecting to it. They're supporting tens or hundreds of end user networks that are connecting back in. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily made the IT admin's job any easier, right? Now they're dealing with a lot more variables and things outside of their control.
Welcome to Evolve Radio, where we explore the evolution of business and technology. I'm your host, Todd Kane. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Steve Petryschuk, technology advocate with Auvik Networks. Steve is here to chat about the findings of the Auvik Network Field Report. Auvik surveyed hundreds of IT pros to get their perspective, their knowledge, and their practices around network management. The report is an interesting mix of insights. I've included a link to the full report in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. For now, enjoy my conversation with Steve as we discuss some of the insights from the report, as well as some general discussion about network management. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast so you get every new episode. Also, if you wouldn't mind, please leave a rating and review in your podcast app. This helps others find the show so we can reach more of the community. Now, on with the show. And joining me today is Steve Petryschuk, technology advocate with Auvik. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks so much for having me, Todd. Great to be here.
Awesome to have you. Obviously, Auvik has a pretty good reputation, pretty good name in the MSP channel and the IT channel more broadly. And some people may or may not know that you guys do some reporting and some analysis and data collection from people that you work with and the field in general. And you guys call this the Network Field Report. So you're here to chat about some of the findings and some of the discoveries and little details that you guys have found in this data that you've collected, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of reports that we do sort of on a fairly regular basis, and this network field report really focuses on the IT administrator and what they're feeling and seeing, what they're doing in their day-to-day life. So it's really focused on that end user, that IT admin.
Okay, great. And for people that may be interested in the report, what are maybe some of the key takeaways that you saw in this report? So
there's a lot of numbers, a lot of data that sort of come up out of this, but there's a couple of things that I think really surprised me as we got started. One of the big things we look at is confidence in the network and knowledge about the network. Obviously, Auvik being a networking company, we're really focused around sort of that networking angle. And probably the biggest surprise is that overall, people are pretty confident in their network's ability to deliver for the business. So over 3/4 of respondents basically said, yeah, I'm confident in my network. But when we asked the question of, how complete is your knowledge about the network? Really, only about half of them said that they had complete knowledge of the network. More than half said that they had incomplete knowledge, meaning that there's a good portion of people who are very confident in their network, but have incomplete knowledge about how it's connected, configured, performing, which is a bit of a risk. And so that was probably one of the most interesting findings.
Did you get a chance to check in with people afterwards and maybe discover sort of where this sort of mental dissociation comes from on, yes, I'm good to go, or anyone asks any questions, you're like, not sure.
So I think some of the data a little bit further down in the report, we get into a little more specific, shine some light possibly on some of those areas. But no, we didn't follow up directly with them to see what was it that sort of led them to answer that.
Do you think that's from my experience, I would think that maybe it's kind of one or two things. I think a lot of people tend to view networks too simplistically. And I think this is actually maybe a bit where Auvik can shine a bit. In if you just have kind of a flat network, there's a single switch and a firewall, then sure, there's probably not a ton that you necessarily need to know, even though there's probably a lot of interesting tidbits in the switch. But the more complicated the network gets, I often don't find that people scale the relevant understanding of that complexity and sort of the mishaps and misconfigurations that can happen in a more complex network. Would you suspect it's kind of a ignorance is bliss type situation?
I would definitely say that, yeah, the ignorance is bliss has definitely a big portion of it. I would say a lot of it as well. Don't want to jump to the COVID stuff too quickly, but there's also like this whole function of if it's been working for a number of months and I'm automatically more confident about it. And as we've seen a lot of transitions this year, our use of the network has changed, and so how it's changed and how that has affected our confidence. I think we might be starting to make some connections there, but because we're not using the networks the same way, they may be up more, be available more. We don't have as many networking issues because the way that we're connecting to them has changed. I definitely think that has led to a bit of the increase in confidence.
Interesting. Okay. So you mentioned COVID, and you're right. The pandemic has drastically changed how, especially corporate environments, are used. A lot more external connections versus internal connections, and it was probably the sort of the flip side of that before. Did you get any other sort of insights around how managing a network is changing through the pandemic?
So one of the big differences between the last time we did this report and now was in the percentage of time that IT admins are spending implementing and researching new systems as opposed to maintaining existing ones. And I think that in itself is probably a result of the digital transformation that we've been forced into this year, right? So previously it was somewhere in the 35 to 40% of the time was spent doing this, researching and implementing new systems, and now it's up to nearly 60%. So we've all been sort of forced to shift what we're doing day to day away from, the maintaining of the existing systems to now enabling the business in this sort of this new COVID world. And I think that's we've seen that shift as well as we started to as we transitioned to this work from home, right? It's new systems to support that infrastructure.
Okay. And any sort of general other blind spots maybe that were the data gave you guys some insight on, or feedback from the people conducting the report?
Yeah. So the other, I would say, big things that sort of shine out, the results we sort of see. One is that only about a third of organizations are backing up their network device configs on sort of a daily or weekly basis. But the changes are occurring on that sort of frequency. So we're getting, more regular updates to network devices, tweaks to firewall policies, maybe firmware updates, all those kind of things are happening on a more regular basis compared to previous years. But the rate of backing up those network configurations isn't sort of keeping pace. So there might be a little bit of a disconnect between how often we should be backing up network devices as well, along with how often they're changing. And what is that acceptable window, right? How is it okay that we, change it maybe daily or weekly, but only back it up once a month? So that might be one, I would say, blind spot that's sort of been uncovered. Another one is that about half of the respondents to the survey indicated they spent a lot of time on projects that they hate or tolerate. So the hate is a pretty strong word for a project. Tolerate a little bit less so. But it was disappointing to see that the percentage of time that IT pros are spending doing things that they don't actually enjoy doing, right? I mean, most of us got into the technology field because we like technology. And if we're spending, half of our time doing things that we don't enjoy doing, that's, going to over time lead to, I guess, a little bit more job dissatisfaction. So
I would say the 1 and 2 almost go together, right? Like documentation and sort of the preparation of the environment is usually not an area that people get up in the morning and go, woo, it's an awesome day, I'm going to start documenting everything. Despite the fact that everyone recognizes the necessity of it, I think that probably sort of is a correlation to those events not necessarily happening unless there's direction or some type of systemized approach to that. I know, not to necessarily get into the product details per se, but this is an area where there are tools like Auvik and others that can automate this function for you, right? I suppose you guys would be fans of automating the erroneous work and the detailed work,
sure.
So that someone else doesn't have to be relied on to do the boring work, right?
Exactly, right. So the idea is, we want to take activities that can be automated and do that. But I would say first, before you get to that point, understand sort of what the policy is around these kind of things. So something like network documentation, be it a configuration backup or network topology maps, right? Like what is our policy around how often those should be updated? Do they need to be up to date to the minute? For some businesses, maybe yes, there's a regulatory compliance that they might have to be. For many others, it's sort of a best practice to have it updated on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. So having a policy around that is the sort of the first component, right? How often do we need this updated? And then I would start to look at, how are we going to make sure that policy is met? Is it a manual process? And again, for some businesses, that's going to be okay. We have the people capacity, or it's something that maybe there is someone out there that enjoys doing that. So it's something I really enjoy doing. So I'll go ahead and do that manually. But if we don't have if we don't have capacity and we have a requirement to do it on have it fairly updated and do it on a regular basis, then we should definitely look at automating those things that are sort of the repetitive tasks, if it can be. I would first say, take a look and understand what tools you already have in your tool set before you start to look for other ones, right? So, don't want to dive too down into this technology. But if I have something that is already backing up my network configs on a monthly basis, can I tune that to up to a weekly or daily or whatever it needs to be? I don't necessarily have to go look for a new solution right away.
Yeah, and the other one you mentioned as well is worth highlighting is in some places this is actually a requirement, right? So if you're doing SOC certification or you're under HIPAA or any of those other type of regulatory requirements, there needs to be some type of change log and hopefully a backup of those changes that are happening to pretty much anything in the environment, especially something like a firewall and certainly probably a switch as well. So that's an important point to keep in mind as well.
Yep, exactly. So if it's regulated, again, so you need to do it. If it's not, there's probably a best practice dictating that you should do it. It becomes a little more optional at that point. But I would say we've all been in one of those spots where we wish that we had the backup or we wish that we had the documentation. I go through that on a daily basis for other, internal processes and stuff. I wish someone had documented this for me. So sometimes it's better just get in front of that and invest the time up front.
Yeah, definitely. So sorry, I derailed you on some of the blind spots. You got a couple of others as well?
There's definitely a few other things in there. I would say if we jump back to some of the data, there's a lot of things that we've actually seen some improvements in over the past couple of years, some things that we've seen a little bit of decrease. One thing that I did want to bring up at some point was sort of the change in or sort of some of the delighters in this report, if you will. So rather than looking at all the negatives, because we sort of talked about some of the negatives so far, if we sort of should focus and look at one of the positives, and that is in the typical IT work week and the productivity of most IT admins over this period of time. So just to sort of start that conversation, what we've basically seen from our side is that there is been a decrease in the number of IT admins working over 50 hours a week, which if you're listening to this and that's a surprise for you and you're going, I'm still working more than 50, I'm sorry, but so we've definitely seen a lot of people start to decrease the number of hours they're reporting working in a week, which is definitely a benefit.
Yeah, that's nice to hear as well, because it's certainly an industry where 60 hours can become the norm. And in my roles in managing IT organizations, I used to get after people when it was running over 50, like 43, 45. Okay. That's fine. Like there's a little extra effort. That's okay. But I remember was one place that I was operating, and the alarm in the building would automatically arm itself at a certain period at night. And pretty routinely, anytime the alarm got tripped about a minute or 2 minutes after that period, I knew exactly who was in the office. I used to pull this guy aside and be like, dude, you don't have to work 60 hours a week. Like, this is not a requirement. I'm concerned for your kind of your mental health, and I don't want you to burn out. He's like, no, it's fine. I enjoy it. It's like, okay, but you don't have to do this. So I am good. I'm pleased to see that people are sort of working on striking a bit of a balance in their life there.
Yep. Yeah. Obviously, our nature was to dig a little bit deeper to try to understand why that occurred, mm-hmm. right? Like, why are we starting to see that decrease? And I don't want to say there's 100% link, but what we're sort of looking at is that there's been an increase in the percentage of time that IT pros are devoting to more proactive tasks rather than reactive tasks. And I think that has a large portion to do like that. That's a big contributor to this change. As we are getting more proactive, there are less fires that we have to fight, and it's often the firefighting that takes us into the hours of the evening, morning, next day, trying to resolve those user issues. So having some ability to be a little bit more proactive, I think, is helping us reduce those work weeks overall. You
kind of spoke about having policies in place, and I think that's a really good suggestion, because sort of the best way to organize yourself and make sure that these things are being done in some routine fashion is to set an expectation of really what people could and should be doing within the environment around documentation, around proactive management, those types of things. Are there any other sort of major points, either from the report or just generally in your experience, that you would suggest are things that people should do as best practices as it relates to network management?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that this becomes a little bit of a collaborative function of both the IT admin, the security team. If your business is mature enough to have like a business continuity team, you guys are all going to sort of have inputs onto what types of things should be done to make sure that the network is always up and available and redundant and secure. So I would say collect some input from those other teams as well, who will start to have some best practices. We talked about policies for things like configuration backups and network topology mapping, but you'll probably also have policies around how often firmware should be updated. You might have like an N-1 for you must be up to date to the N-1 revision. And so you'll want to take a look at some of those policies as well. I would say that's probably the big ones.
Yeah, that's one actually that I think doesn't really kind of get enough attention or doesn't get as much focus. I find a lot of organizations tend to do firmware updates on an infrequent basis. They kind of view it as if it's not broken, then maybe the firmware isn't the issue, and I feel like I'm more likely to introduce a problem or brick something. I don't think that that's an issue anymore, but kind of the older guard in the IT industry can remember BIOS updates and sweaty palms trying to update things and fearing that it may not come back up. And I don't think that those are concerns that people should have anymore. But it's usually what you suggest, and from a troubleshooting perspective, if you call a vendor for support, the first thing they're going to ask you is, are you on the current version? So that N-1 certainly makes that easier. And I think that's a good suggestion for sure.
You sort of reminded me of there's still some people have this mentality that proud of the uptime on a switch or proud of the uptime on a firewall. And yes, from an uptime and availability, that's a great metric to look at. But it also, many security teams will look at that and say, "Well, you mean that device hasn't been updated in 2 years, 3 years? Whoa, right?" And so that becomes a little bit of a concern at that point.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. Like that's often kind of those bellwethers that you can use around infrastructure health. Like, okay, we've got a server that's been up for a year and a half. Like you said, sounds good, but actually not good, right? Same thing applies for the network infrastructure. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Planned downtime is okay. It's when it becomes unplanned that becomes in that reactive firefighting mode where that's exactly more of a challenge.
Yeah. It's a specific call out. That's a good one for sure. So how often do you guys do this report? It's not annually, right?
That's right. So the last time we did this report was actually back in 2015. So there's been a number of years since that was last done. Now, moving out into the next couple of years, I'm not sure whether the plan is to do another one this year and the year after, but I think it'd be interesting to start to see some of these trends. One interesting question that sort of came up out of all of this is we've seen a lot of improvements, but can all these metrics continue to improve, right? Like, are we going to see the work week continue to go down, or have we started to stagnate in some of these? And I think the jury's still out a little bit on that. I think there's still more gains to see in our confidence in the network. I think there's still more gains to see in our knowledge of the network, right? We're always going to improve those things. But there's going to be a diminishing return at some point, right? Like, we're never going to be, 100% proactive. There's only so many guardrails that you can put in front of your users. They're still going to find a way to do something wrong and bring something down, or there's still going to be, an event that's outside of your control. So I think, we'll still continue to see gains in a lot of these areas. And I hope that we at least, don't go backwards. I think if we stop trying to improve, like stop trying to be more proactive, don't invest the time in additional visibility, additional knowledge of the network, additional documentation now, that we'll actually see some of these metrics start to go back to previous levels, where we'll start to see us become more reactive. We've gotten to a good point now. How do we maintain? It's, again, by continuing to march forward, right? Keep going instead of, stopping and enjoying this spot that we're in.
Yeah. So. This probably isn't borne out in the data, but I'm curious kind of your perspective on this. As we touched on sort of the difference in the network that we've now pushed people to the periphery of the network working from home. Is some of this sort of based on the fact that the core infrastructure within the office is sort of less disrupted by the user traffic, the user utilization, any changes that are happening, and the ingress points for the network are more standardized through VPN or SaaS apps or terminal services, for example? Do you have a sense that it feels easier because those access points are more standardized and less disruption on the core network?
I would say for the corporate network, we've probably seen a lot less change over the past few months than we typically would. But one of the challenges for the typical IT admin is going to be that now they're no longer supporting one corporate network with users connecting to it. They're supporting tens or hundreds of end user networks that are connecting back in. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily made the IT admin's job any easier, right? Now they're dealing with a lot more variables and things outside of their control. But I would definitely say that there's been a lot less change to corporate networks over the past year than we would have seen in the past. Again, you're right; it's not really there in the data, but that's what I would suspect. I also think you have a little bit of a different experience for different organizations. An organization who had embraced SaaS applications and cloud services, prior to March 2020, is going to be in a much different position now than an organization who hadn't embraced cloud services. Right? There might be organizations that have very little reliance on the office network these days because they've gone fully remote. You also have organizations that are still in the office, right, for certain essential services that still need to show up. They still have to have this network up and operational. So we no longer have a unified experience. There's many different stories and many different tales to tell here, depending on whether how essential your business is, whether you're in the office or not, and then how much you had embraced cloud services prior to COVID hitting here.
Okay, and I also want to extrapolate a bit on this. On this, the Evolved Radio podcast, we talk about the intersection and the future of business and technology. And I'm curious, Sure. How do you feel, kind of from your perspective, you're a technology advocate for a very large network management software company. What do you feel is sort of the future of the IT infrastructure network, especially with the adoption of cloud? Not that the corporate network will become sort of less important, but what do you see are things that potentially change or need to be adapted for as we grow into a more sort of web-based future?
As we continue this transition, having an understanding and being able to monitor, troubleshoot, identify problems with the end user experience become so much more common, right? It's no longer about making sure that my servers or my services are up and available. It's about what is the user experience interacting with those services. So whether those services are in the cloud, in your data center, on premise at an office, it's all about how is the user interacting with that service and what is their experience like? Are they experiencing latency? Are they experiencing access issues? And how to enable us to get in front of those, to identify it before the user reports it, self-remediate maybe one day, right? But be able to identify, again, more user experience issues rather than issues with, the hardware on, wherever that hardware may be.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. I like that. I think that's right on. So anything that I haven't asked you, any things that we should touch on, either from the report or from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we've used the word blind spot a couple of times as we're talking here, and I'm not sure that we ever really define what that is. And so it might be worth just chatting for a second on why we use the term blind spot and why we went with that in this report. And really, for me, that was identifying areas of risk, right? Gaps between best practices and reality, or gaps between, what you expect to see and what's actually happening. Very similar to that blind spot in a car, right? And so as much as you can eliminate and put in quick checks, quick blind spot checks to make sure that you're identifying where those risks are, it's all about sort of just taking a step back and looking around you, which I don't know that we always, as IT admins, have time to do, right? We're always in the weeds, fighting fires, or pedal to the metal to try to get new projects implemented. We need to make sure that we're always sort of looking over our shoulder and checking those blind spots for those best practices. So shouldn't always be go, go, go.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, especially with how quickly the industry changes. And you should definitely be kind of, obviously listening to podcasts and going to industry events and trying to collect as much knowledge as you can, because it's a really important point. The unknown unknowns, as the expression goes, right? You can't correct or defend against something that you've never really considered. So that expansion of your knowledge and understanding of what are the areas that could be a risk is really, really important. Yeah, good point.
Yeah. One other area that we started to explore through the report as well was, and probably relevant to a lot of your listeners as well, is sort of the outsourcing of IT services and how that's changed a little bit. And we didn't have as much data on that from back in 2015 in the report, but some interesting numbers sort of came up on, what types of tasks are outsourced and how much outsourcing has been done within the community. So maybe we can dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big. I'm a big proponent of it. I think it's a useful expansion in an elastic fashion for especially a lot of outsourced IT providers. So I'd be curious, kind of your thoughts on how that affects the networks.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of data points. We broke the data down by organizational size as well, and so one of the things we looked at are organizations that were sort of in the 200 to 1,000 user range, and then 1,000 users and up. And it was like a tale of two cities at that point, where we had companies under 1,000 users were 90% likely to outsource some IT management function, right? Whether it was everything or a portion of it, whereas organizations that were sort of over that 1,000 users were only 17% likely to outsource any services. So that's a big difference, right? I'm either almost for certain going to outsource or almost certainly not going to outsource, depending on where we are at in the size of the organization. And then when we started to break down what types of services were outsourced, there was about 3/4 of the companies that were actually outsourcing already some network-related tasks, whether it be making changes to the network or doing things like monitoring and configuration management, those type of things. So a pretty big portion of the outsourcing that's done is network management type tasks.
Yeah, and that demarc point of 1,000 is interesting because I think a lot of, certainly in the MSP channel, people tend to think of 250 as sort of a high barrier, and then 500 as just like, yeah, it starts to get a little weird at that point, and there tends to be a lot more internal IT. But you're right, like there's always some portion of that services that is potentially outsourceable. So, companies up to 1,000 staff, that's a very, very wide market of opportunity for the channel.
Sure, I would say it would take a little bit different approach than your standard, couple hundred person company, right? If you're looking at outsourcing just a portion of their IT support services, it probably won't be everything from day one. Maybe you can sort of work that up over time, but understanding what are the services the outsourcer provides best. And if I'm an in-house IT admin looking at this data, I'm thinking, what are the things that I don't like spending my time doing? What are the things that I could outsource? And it's often something that I think about in my world as well. What are the daily tasks I don't like doing, and how can I outsource that to someone to make my life easier? So it's it can be beneficial to both the outsourcer and the internal admin to identify what are the things that I'm good at, what are the things, and then what are the things that I don't really want to be doing. There's probably someone that can take on some of those functions for you.
Yeah, I strongly agree that was sort of how I position this from a sales perspective when working, in an IT outsourcer as well as coaching some. That I tend to say that the internal IT organization shouldn't be threatened by you if you position this correctly, in that they probably don't like doing the desktop support work. So right. If they want to outsource that to you to allow them to spend more time on projects, then great. Or the inverse, that they're good with the client service end of things. They're going to do the desktop, but they don't necessarily have the tier 3, tier 4 architectural skills that you potentially bring. So you can do the projects while they focus on the support. So it's largely just a division of duties, and everyone ends up happy, because I always say, like, the internal IT can usually only do one of them well, right? They're too busy with projects to give great customer service and great support to the users, or they're too busy with customer service and support to do the proactive and the project activities that they know are necessary. So I agree, there's a strong case for both parties working within that hybrid IT environment, right? Right,
absolutely. We saw a little bit of that in the data as well. There was about 41% of organizations that actually reported spending no time at all in network planning. So if you're an internal IT admin that's finding yourself in that situation, right, either identify, hey, that's something I want to be doing, recognize I need to do it, and outsource other functions. Or if it's something that isn't necessarily your cup of tea, I'm sure there's an outsourcer there that would love to sort of help you with that network planning and helping you with that medium to long-term roadmap.
That's awesome. All right, Steve, well, we look to wrap up here. Obviously, we've talked a lot about this report, and this is something that people will be able to get access to. We'll include a link in the show notes. Is there anything else you want to call out around the report and people kind of getting access to that?
Nope. So the report is available. I think, like I said, link will be in the show notes. Full details, lots of numbers in the report. You can slice and dice it a number of different ways. If you have any questions on it, obviously engage with us through the social channels. We'd love to have a chat with you further on it.
Okay. And where can people find more info about yourself and or Auvik if they'd like?
Sure. So find out about myself. You can find me on LinkedIn, Steve Petryschuk, or if you go to our blog, I also have a few entries there, and then auvik.com, auvik.com.
Awesome. I appreciate your time, Steve, and look forward to peeling through the report and see what we see.
Thanks so much for having me.